Alright everyone, good to see you. I'm going to do a bit of a different video. You can see here I'm out in the area around Bing, or by Pacific Spirit Park, and I'm hoping to talk a bit about a few of the major plants, or specifically trees, as well as trying to find a few of some very specific critters. So I've actually found one here. Let me flip this around and I'll show you. Alrighty, so what we have here, a lot of you may be aware of, or have already known about, but this is what's called a banana slug. Now there's some cool things about these slugs. They're actually one of the largest in North America, and they're actually one of the largest land slugs in the world. This one is pretty small, if I put my finger next to it, but they can get quite a bit bigger. I think they can get up to like 16 centimeters in length, so double to triple this size. Now, they've got a cool few features. I'll zoom in on this. You can see there's kind of two physical aspects or the two features. There's right here, this part right here is called the mantle, and then the rest of it is called the tail. So you can always tell the front end is where the mantle is. If I try and get around here, whoops. If I try to get in near the front, you can see as it moves around, there's two eye stalks at the top, but you might also be able to see that there's two near the bottom. So the two on the top are where the snail is able to see, and the two on the bottom are called sensory stalks. They're basically how it can feel around. Now, a couple of other features about this. These snails belong to the mollusk family. Now, one of the cool things about these snails, first up, they come in all sorts of colors. This one's kind of a brownish color, which is about average, but they're called banana slugs because they can basically range from anywhere a banana would. So some of them are yellow, some of them are mottled, some of them are black, a lot of them are brown or greenish. But one of the cool features about these that I'm going to try to show you is you guys did very well when you were researching about mollusks, specifically around symmetry. So a lot of you mentioned that they have bilateral symmetry, so that means you can split them down the half or down the middle. But a lot of you also noticed that some of them said that they had asymmetry. So an example of asymmetry here, I come around, focus here. So one of the things, it'd be hard to see, but if I go on this side, notice how the mantle is very smooth and unobstructed. If instead I go around to this side, it might be hard to see, but there's actually on the right hand side, right around here, there's a tiny hole. Now that is actually the opening to its lung, and it only has one lung, and they're always on the right hand side. So even here on land, there are examples of mollusks with asymmetry. Some of that leftover features from when they were living in the sea. Now, there's one other interesting thing. I'm going to stand up here and flip it back around. So, one of the interesting things about these snails is they have a very special adaptation for keeping themselves safe. Their slime, which every snail basically uses to move, is actually a numbing agent. So if a predator tries to bite into these, they'll basically get a mouthful of this slime, which feels nasty, but also will make their mouths go numb. So imagine if you were going to a dentist and you're getting a tooth pulled, it basically feels exactly like that. And I've actually tried it once. If you take a bit of their slime, rub it on your gums, it'll go numb, and it'll basically have the exact same feeling as when you're going to the dentist. And in fact, one of the things that First Nations used this animal for is for toothaches. So they had a toothache, they would take some of the slime, rub it on their gums, and it would numb the pain for a short time. They have been known to be eaten in cuisine, but they're not super palatable, they're not super tasty. But again, if you're in any sort of wooded area around the West Coast, Pacific Spirit Park, Stanley Park, for example, you'll see lots of these. So we're gonna keep walking, see what else we can find. All right, so here we see a much larger banana slug. You can tell if I bring my finger behind it, it's almost twice the size of the other ones. Now, one of the cool things about this, I also get to show you its feet, or its foot, I should say, because it doesn't have feet. It basically glides over a coat of slime. But you can see this part right here is a different sort of tissue than the rest. The other part is showing you its lung. So again, we're on the left-hand side. You can see the mantle is very smooth. But if I bring it around, this hole right here, on its right side is its lung. So a bit of asymmetry there, and you can see how large the opening is. It's very vascularized. It's used for taking in a lot of gas exchange. And yeah, really cool. All right, so the other things I wanted to make this video on was on 3 specific trees that are very common here and important to First Nations here on the West Coast. So the 3 that I'm talking about are Douglas fir, the Western hemlock, and the Western cedar. And these are the 3 largest varieties of trees that you'll see here on the West Coast. So I'm gonna try to find some of them. I don't believe there's too many Douglas firs where I am, but if I see any, I'll show you. All these trees have a lot of cool facts about them, and I'll try and point them out if I see them. The first one that we'll talk about, I'll save the best for last, or my favorite for last. So we'll talk about the hemlock. So the hemlock is coniferous, so it has pine or like needles, and it is part of the gymnosperm family, so it has cones. Now, some of the things about it, you may have heard the term hemlock. It's a very common name for plants, but in Europe, there is a type of hemlock weed, which is in fact poisonous. And it is famously known for being responsible for killing Socrates, the philosopher. Apparently he had some and died as a result. Now, hemlocks here aren't related in any way to those. There are some features about them though that you can help to spot them. So first up, let me turn this around here. All right, so I'll point out the hemlock that I can see here. You can see a few of them. And I don't know if you can see my green laser pointer, but when you're looking up, you can tell a hemlock by its distinctive droop at the top. There's actually a story about it, so I'll tell you about that. And the other thing you can tell, for such a large tree, they've actually got one of the smallest cones for their reproductive organs of any tree. So the story about the hemlock, how First Nations tell it, is that when the creator created all these trees, created all the animals, all the plants, there was a point where they had to decide which seeds they got. And what ended up happening was all the trees would line up and they would pick their seeds. And the trees lined up from biggest to smallest. So the big trees would get the big seeds because they got to go first. And what ended up happening was hemlocks are not the largest tree. So cedars, Douglas firs are both bigger. Well, what the hemlock did was it tried to cut in line. And it was caught doing this. It was caught cheating, basically. And so the creator told them, the hemlock, you know, go to the back of the line. You get to choose last now as a result, and to hang your head in shame. So this story is about being humble, waiting your turn, but it also is a good way to identify these trees based on the fact that they have very small seed cones. In fact, here they are right here. So very, very tiny cones for such a large tree. And as well, there's that distinctive droopiness to them that you're able to really identify. And I think where I am currently, there are a lot of hemlocks. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna try to find a cedar and a Douglas fir. But we'll talk about the cedar next. The cedar is one of the staples of First Nations culture and just nature around in the West Coast in general. So one of the things it's used for is its bark has excellent mold repelling properties. It doesn't rot very well. Where we've seen it used would be in, say, like saunas. A lot of those use cedar because it is very water resistant. And even better, the cedar's bark can be harvested safely without hurting the plant. And one of the things about it, once I find one I can show it to you, is that they have very vertical strips of bark. So you can relatively easily take a large section of the bark, and first off, you won't kill the plant, the tree, but secondly, you will have basically an entire tree's length worth of bark. And what they would do is, First Nations cultures would weave this into baskets, into material that is very water resistant. And one of the ways that you can clearly identify these trees is from how the bark looks. So moving in, one of the reasons why we call them red cedars is because you can tell from its distinctive red hue. As well, they tend to grow quite large. Not having the most luck finding them at the moment. All right. All right, so here I have a pretty close, or a very young red cedar. It's not anywhere near maturity, but also pan it over and show sort of the bark of this tree. Now, you can see, if I pan up, these strips go very vertical in long, continuous columns. So what First Nations would actually do is, once they had a tree that they wanted to harvest from, they would make a cut along the bark and basically pull up, and it would be one continuous strip all the way up the tree. From there, they could harvest, I believe once they had harvested a tree, they would not harvest from it again. Basically, waiting until it was a certain age, they would be able to gather a lot of material from one tree without killing the tree. All right. Saving the best for last, talking about the Douglas fir. Douglas firs are one of the largest trees. So Douglas firs are one of the largest trees just in general. And you can tell a Douglas fir by its bark. So whereas both the hemlock and the cedars are very smooth, the Douglas firs will look very, very, very rough, very jagged. All right, so here we have our Douglas fir. I was actually able to find one. You can see it's quite large, and you can see comparatively its bark has this very kind of knotted nature. It has a lot more structure, a lot more, how do I say it? There's a lot more ridges in the bark, especially if you look above the moss. Now, interesting things about Douglas firs is they need a lot of sunlight to grow. Imagine if you're growing to be one of the tallest trees, you would want to be getting the most sunlight. So what this means for Douglas firs is that they need to actually grow very quickly. They grow to their full height in anywhere between 5 to 10 years before they grow outwards. So they actually remain a very thin and very kind of tall, lanky sort of tree before they grow in size and height or in width. The other thing, because they need such a huge volume of canopy space, which for a rainforest is hard to come by, a lot of the times they are requiring open space, and the best time to get that is during a forest fire. Now, forest fires aren't generally good for trees, so the Douglas fir has some adaptations to help with that. So first up, its cones only become germinated, only release their seeds after being baked at a certain temperature. So this means that most of the seeds will only sprout and plant if they reach a certain temperature, which allows them to grow when their conditions are right, when there's no more trees around. Additionally, the outer bark of Douglas firs are actually, to an extent, fire resistant. They will still burn, but they don't burn nearly as well as, say, a cedar. The third, and this might seem counterintuitive, but their sap is extremely flammable. Now, where this becomes an adaptation is during forest fires, the sap will boil inside of the tree and then shoot out. And when it shoots out, it ignites and it lights all the other trees on fire around it. So what this will end up doing during a forest fire, adult Douglas firs will basically torch or spread fire to other trees around it in order to clear the canopy around it in order for the new Douglas fir seedlings to grow. And when I heard this, it was just absolutely incredible that a tree would basically encourage a fire at all, but also that it needed it basically to complete its life cycle and reproduce. So those are sort of the three big trees that I really wanted to talk about, really wanted to share. If you go for any sort of walk in any sort of wooded area, you'll be able to find these. Especially if you're in Vancouver itself, you're not going to see a lot of the wildlife that exists around here, but things that you might come across are things like raccoons. You'll come across birds of all sorts, blue herons, ducks if you're anywhere near the water. And yeah, I figured I would just kind of show you some different animals, different plants, and some of the stories that go around them, and some of their adaptations that help them live in this environment. So I'll try to do one more video. I don't know when I'll be able to get out again, but I might end up posting it somewhere time over the summer. If you want, watch them. They're still biology content, but hopefully you find it enjoyable. And as always, take care, stay safe, have a good one.